Anna woke up to the usual sounds of the city, the honking horns, the chatter of people on their way to work, and the distant rumble of train. The cold pavement beneath her body sent a shiver through her bones as she slowly stirred, blinking against the early morning sunlight. Her red shirt, now frayed and worn, clung to her thin frame, its bright color fading with each passing day, but it was the only thing she owned. She had no blankets, no pillow, no family to wake up to, just the streets, endless, unforgiving, and cold. The small alley she had slept in the night before offered only a brief moment of warmth before the harsh reality of the world outside came crashing in. Her stomach growled, a constant reminder of how little she had. Food was scarce, and even when she found it, it was never enough to fill the emptiness. Anna's days followed the same monotonous routine. She would wander the streets, dodging the harsh words and angry glares of passersby. She tried to avoid the men who would sometimes linger in dark corners, their eyes glinting with something sinister. But the streets had a way of finding you, no matter how much you tried to hide. Still, there was one thing Anna held onto: her dream of going to school. She had seen the children in their uniforms, their faces full of hope and curiosity. They walked with backpacks slung over their shoulders, carrying with them the weight of knowledge, the key to a future far beyond the city's gray walls. Anna longed for that. She longed to sit in a classroom, to learn, to be something more than just a shadow in the streets. But there was a problem. The other children, the ones who lived on the streets like her, would never let her be normal. They would tease her, call her names, and sometimes even shove her around. Their cruelty was a constant companion, just like the hunger gnawing at her insides. And there was something else: her red shirt. She never took it off. No matter the temperature, no matter how hot the sun burned her skin, Anna kept it on. It wasn't because she liked the color or the way it fit her. No, it was because under that red shirt she carried scars. Scars from the nights when the other homeless people, the ones who ruled the streets, would beat her. It was their way of asserting control, of reminding Anna that she was nothing, just a girl with no home, no family, no voice. Her arms were covered in bruises and scratches. Her back ached from the beatings, and her legs too bore the marks of the life she had been forced into. But the red shirt hid it all. It was her shield, her protection from the outside world. No one could see the damage she carried inside, the fear, the pain, and the loneliness. But despite everything, Anna held on to her hope. She kept going to the school, even though she knew she didn't belong there. She would sit at the back of the classroom, watching the other children, silently wishing she could be like them. She wanted to raise her hand, to answer questions, to feel the satisfaction of learning. But mostly, she just wanted to feel like she mattered. One morning, the teacher, Mrs. Silva, noticed something unusual. Anna had come to school as usual, with her red shirt, but this time, something was different. She wasn't sitting quietly in the back of the room. Her shoulders were slumped, her head down, as though the weight of the world was pressing on her. Mrs. Silva couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen Anna before, but today there was a sadness in her eyes that didn't belong. When the bell rang for recess, she walked over to Anna, who was sitting alone on a bench, staring out at the playground, her gaze distant. "Anna," Mrs. Silva said softly, kneeling in front of her. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond, but Mrs. Silva could see the fear in her eyes. She reached out, gently lifting Anna's sleeve, and that's when she saw them: the bruises, the cuts, the signs of violence. Anna recoiled, as if trying to shrink into herself, but Mrs. Silva's heart broke as she saw the marks on the girl's skin. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes. She didn't want to cry, but the emotions she had been holding back for so long came rushing to the surface. She bit her lip, trying to keep the sobs inside, but they spilled out, uncontrollable. I can't take it anymore," Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. They hurt me. Every day, they hit me. I don't know what to do." Mrs. Silva's heart ached as she reached out to pull Anna into a hug. The girl's small body trembled in her arms, and for a moment, all the teacher could do was hold her, offering what little comfort she could. "Anna," Mrs. Silva said softly, pulling back to look at the girl's face. "You don't have to go through this alone. You matter. You're not invisible." But Anna couldn't believe it. No one had ever told her that before. No one had ever looked at her with kindness, with warmth. She was just another face in the crowd, another nameless, forgotten child lost in the system. Mrs. Silva's heart swelled with compassion. She couldn't stand to see Anna suffer like this. In that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Anna, she said gently, I want to help you. I want to make sure you're safe. You don't have to live like this anymore. You deserve better. Anna looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. Could it be true? Could someone really care about her? Mrs. Silva's heart raced as she spoke. The words that would change everything. I want to adopt you. Anna didn't know what to say. The idea of having a family, of having a place to call home, seemed too good to be true. But for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. Maybe the red shirt she wore could become a symbol of the past, not the future. The days that followed were a blur for Anna. She had never experienced anything like this before. The soft, caring voice of Mrs. Silva, the teacher who had promised to help her. Each word the woman spoke lingered in Anna's mind like a delicate promise. You don't have to go through this alone. The words echoed in her head as she lay on the hard ground at night, staring at the stars, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for: safety. It was almost foreign to her, this idea of protection, of someone caring enough to fight for her. All her life, she had been invisible, forgotten by the world. Now, there was a chance, a real opportunity that someone wanted to see her, to give her a life beyond the streets. But as much as she wanted to believe, fear gripped her heart. Could it really be possible? Could she actually leave the streets behind and live somewhere warm, somewhere safe, with someone who cared? That evening, after school, Mrs. Silva took Anna by the hand and led her to the school's small office. Anna had been there only a few times before, for small issues like forgotten homework or lost papers, but today felt different. The office seemed quieter, the air thicker, as if everything was hanging on the edge of something monumental. Mrs. Silva sat her down in a chair and spoke with the school counselor, a kind woman named Miss Clara. Anna fidgeted nervously in her seat, tugging at the red shirt that had become so familiar to her. She hadn't taken it off in months, maybe even years, afraid of what might happen if someone saw the truth of her life, the reality of her situation, the bruises, the cuts, the constant fear. It all felt so raw, so close to the surface. Miss Clara turned to Anna, offering her a reassuring smile. You're safe here, Anna. We're going to make sure of that. But how could she believe them? How could she believe that someone would actually take care of her when every person she had ever known had turned their back on her? She had learned early on to fend for herself, to trust no one but her own instincts. Mrs. Silva returned to the conversation, and Anna heard the word adoption again. But it didn't register at first. It sounded like something from a storybook, something far too perfect to be real. Anna, Mrs. Silva said gently, I want you to know that I'm serious about this. If you're willing, we can start the process. I want you to have a home, a family, a future. The word family hit her like a wave. She didn't remember what it felt like to have one. The memories of her mother were fragmented, lost in the haze of time. Her father, if she had one, was just a shadow, a blur. Anna had never known love in the way other children did, and the thought of it made her chest tighten. Tears pricked at her eyes as she thought about the life she had known, the pain, the fear, the days of hunger and cold. But now there was something else, a chance, a real chance at something better. Mrs. Silva watched her quietly, waiting for Anna to process the offer. She knew it was a lot to take in. The girl had lived through so much, and trust wasn't something that came easily. Anna's heart raced. She glanced down at her red shirt, its fabric worn and stretched in places. It had been her armor for so long, her only protection. Would taking it off, metaphorically speaking, mean letting go of the only life she knew? Could she really embrace a new one? Slowly, Anna looked up, meeting Mrs. Silva's kind eyes. There was a flicker of something inside her, a spark of belief. Maybe this time, someone would keep their promise. Maybe this time, things could be different. Yes, Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. I want to try. I want to go to school. And I want to have a family. Mrs. Silva's face lit up with a warmth that Anna had never seen before. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders in that moment. "You'll have both, Anna," Mrs. Silva said softly, "and we'll do it together." As they left the office, Anna felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her: fear, excitement, and something unfamiliar, something like hope. She still wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. Maybe, just maybe, the red shirt could come off soon. Maybe, in time, she would learn what it meant to have a home. But for now, she held on to the promise Mrs. Silva had made. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, doubts, and challenges, but Anna was ready to face them. She was ready to fight for the future she had always dreamed of. And with someone on her side, for the first time in her life, she felt like it was possible. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Anna. Every morning, she woke with a sense of trepidation, unsure of what the day would bring, yet also overwhelmed by the possibility of something better. The promise of a family, of safety, of a future. These were all things she had never dared to dream of. But now, they seemed within reach, so close she could almost touch them. It wasn't easy though. Anna's mind was constantly filled with doubts. She would wake up in the small corner of the alley where she had been sleeping for months, staring at the familiar walls of the street, feeling the cold concrete under her skin. The moment she stepped into the world again, those feelings of fear and isolation would rush back like waves crashing over her. On the second day after Mrs. Silva's offer, Anna went to school as usual, but her heart wasn't in it. She sat in her usual seat, far in the back of the classroom, trying to focus on the lessons but distracted by the weight of everything she was carrying inside. Her mind raced with questions. Was she really ready for this? Could she trust Mrs. Silva? Or was this just another lie? And even if it was real, could she truly leave behind the streets that had been her only home for so long? As the class went on, Anna's gaze wandered to the other children who didn't have to worry about where they would sleep that night or if they would have enough to eat. She watched them with a quiet envy, wondering what it would be like to be like them, to have a family who cared for her, who made sure she was safe, who didn't forget her existence the moment she walked out of the door. At recess, Mrs. Silva pulled Anna aside, her expression warm yet serious. "Anna," she said gently, "I need to talk to you. I know you're scared. I understand this is all happening so quickly, but I want you to know that you don't have to decide everything at once. You can take your time." Anna's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. The words were there, just out of reach, but she couldn't bring herself to speak them. She wanted to believe in Mrs. Silva, wanted to trust that this was real, but it felt too good to be true. Mrs. Silva knelt down, meeting her eye level. "You don't have to decide about adoption today. Just know that you are safe here, and that, if you want to talk, I'm always here." For the first time in what felt like forever, Anna allowed herself to smile, a small, fragile smile that barely touched her lips. But it was there. She felt it, and that small flicker of hope made the rest of the day a little easier to bear. That evening, after school, Mrs. Silva took Anna to a small cafe, nothing fancy, just a cozy corner shop with old wooden tables and a few mismatched chairs. It was the first time Anna had been inside a place like this. She had never been able to afford luxuries like sitting down in a cafe, and the warm, comforting smell of freshly baked bread and coffee filled her senses. Mrs. Silva ordered hot chocolate for Anna and coffee for herself. They sat at a small table by the window, and Anna couldn't help but stare out at the bustling street outside. The world seemed so different from the life she knew. It felt so normal. As they sipped their drinks, Mrs. Silva began to talk about the next steps. "We'll start by finding a safe place for you to stay. I've already spoken to a few people, and we're working on getting you into a temporary foster home until everything is sorted out. I know it's a lot, but I'll be with you through every step." Anna nodded quietly, though the words felt like a distant echo in her mind. She wasn't sure what a foster home meant. Would it be a place like this cafe, warm and comfort, or would it feel like another cold corner of the world, another place where she didn't belong? Her mind was still tangled in doubt, but something about the way Mrs. Silva spoke made her feel a little less alone. There was sincerity in her voice, a softness that Anna had never heard before. Later that evening, as Anna lay in the corner of the alley, where she had spent so many nights. Her thoughts wandered to what Mrs. Silva had said. Tomorrow, they would start the process of finding her a new home. Anna didn't know exactly what that meant, but she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't a solution to everything, she knew that much. The streets, the fear, the pain, it didn't just disappear because someone offered her help, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. As she pulled the red shirt tightly around her shoulders, a familiar comfort, she thought of what it might feel like to take it off one day. Not because she was ashamed, but because she no longer needed to hide. Because maybe she would have a place where she could simply be a child again, where the red shirt would become a symbol of the past, not the future. Tomorrow, she would take the first step. And for the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe it was worth the risk. The next few days felt like a blur, a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Anna found it difficult to focus in school, her thoughts constantly drifting to the unknown that awaited her. The idea of leaving the streets was overwhelming, but she knew she had no choice. There was a part of her that wanted to cling to the familiar, to the life she had known, no matter how painful it had been. But another part of her, one that had been dormant for so long, was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be something better. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that everything changed. Mrs. Silva arrived at school with a smile on her face and a gentle look in her eyes that Anna had come to recognize as a promised one that was slowly beginning to feel real. "We found a place for you to stay, Anna," Mrs. Silva said, her voice soft but full of determination. "It's a temporary foster home, just until we can work out the adoption process. I know it's not easy, but this is the first step." Anna's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, but there it was. A place of her own, a roof over her head, a bed to sleep in. It was all so surreal. The drive to the foster home felt long and never-ending. Anna sat in the front seat of Mrs. Silva's car, her hands tightly gripping her backpack, her legs bouncing with nervous energy. The rain pelted against the windows, and the streets outside looked different, blurry, as though the world was moving too fast for her to keep up. But all she could think about was the unknown ahead. Would she like it there? Would she be safe? What if it was just another place where she didn't belong? Mrs. Silva glanced at her, sensing the whirlwind of emotions that Anna was trying to hide. "It's going to be okay, Anna," she said gently. "You're not alone in this anymore." Anna didn't reply, but she nodded, trying to hold on to her trust in the woman beside her. Her stomach churned with fear and excitement, her thoughts a tangled mess. The streets had been her home for so long that the idea of leaving them behind felt both freeing and terrifying. When they arrived at the foster home, Anna hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. It was a modest house on a quiet street, tucked away in a neighborhood where the sound of children's laughter filled the air. The house looked warm, inviting even, with a small porch and a garden in the front yard. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt like a world away from the cold concrete of the streets. Mrs. Silva opened the door and led Anna inside. The interior was cozy, with soft lighting and the smell of something baking in the oven. Anna's heart beat faster as she looked around, unsure of what to expect. There were two women sitting on the couch, one older, with gray hair and a kind face, and the other, a younger woman, who smiled warmly at Anna. "Hello, Anna," the older woman said, her voice gentle and welcoming. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins, and this is my daughter, Lisa. We're going to take care of you for as long as you need. You're safe here." Anna stood in the doorway, unsure of how to respond. Her throat tightened, and she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had never known kindness like this, never known what it felt like to be welcomed, to be cared for. It was foreign, unsettling, but at the same time, it was exactly what she had been yearning for. Lisa stood up and walked over to Anna. She knelt down to her level, offering a soft smile. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we're here for you. You can stay as long as you need. No one is going to hurt you here." Anna's heart trembled at the word. She wanted to believe them, but part of her was still scared. What if this was just a temporary fix? A fleeting moment of comfort that would fade as quickly as it had come? Could she really trust these strangers? Mrs. Jenkins walked over and placed a gentle hand on Anna's shoulder. "We understand that this is hard," she said, "but we want to make this a place where you can feel safe, where you can heal. There's no rush. Take your time." Anna's eyes darted to the window, where the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but deep down, she knew it was her only chance. For the first time in so long, she allowed herself to exhale, to relax just a little. That evening, Mrs. Jenkins showed Anna to her room, a small, cozy space with a bed that was covered in soft blankets. There was a stuffed bear on the bed, its brown eyes staring up at her, and a nightlight glowing softly in the corner. Anna's chest tightened, and she swallowed hard to keep the tears at bay. She hadn't had a bed to call her own in years. The streets had been her only constant, but now, she was in a place where she could rest, a place where no one would hurt her. After a long day, she climbed into the bed, pulling the blankets tight around her. The room was quiet, peaceful even, and for the first time in ages, Anna felt a sense of calm wash over her. She closed her eyes, not fully trusting the comfort yet, but willing to let it sink in. The red shirt was still there, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like it defined her. It had been her shield, her protection, but now she was in a place where she could take it off, if only in her heart. Tomorrow, maybe she would start to believe. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally belong. Anna woke to the soft light filtering through the curtains, a subtle warmth in the room that felt completely different from the cold, harsh mornings she was used to. The familiar sounds of the street, the honking cars, the shouting vendors were absent. Instead, there was just the quiet hum of a peaceful neighborhood, a world she had never been part of. She lay still for a moment, unsure of what to do. The bed felt too soft to comfort her, and for a second, she almost convinced herself it was a dream. But no, it was real. She was in a real bed, with a real roof over her head. Sitting up slowly, Anna glanced around the room. It was small, but cozy, with pastel-colored walls and a simple wooden dresser. A few posters of animals adorned the walls, a gentle reminder that this wasn't just a temporary place, it was a space meant for living, for growing. She noticed the stuffed bear again, sitting at the edge of the bed, its stitched smile almost as if it were offering comfort. It was small, a bit worn, but the gesture behind it was clear. Someone cared, and that was something Anna hadn't felt in a long time. After a moment, Anna slipped out of bed, her feet sinking into the soft carpet. The morning air had a slight chill to it, but it was nothing compared to the cold she was used to on the streets. She pulled on her red shirt, the one she had worn for so long, and hesitated for a moment before walking out of the room. Down the hallway, she could hear Mrs. Jenkins humming softly in the kitchen. The smell of something warm and sweet filled the air, and Anna's stomach growled in response. She hadn't eaten much the night before, too nervous and unsure about everything. But now, the scent of breakfast seemed like a gift, something she had almost forgotten existed. When she entered the kitchen, Mrs. Jenkins greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Anna. How did you sleep?" Anna didn't know how to respond. She hadn't slept like this in years, without fear, without worry. "I slept okay," she said quietly. "Better than I've ever slept. That's good to hear," Mrs. Jenkins said as she set a plate of pancakes in front of Anna. "I made you some breakfast. Eat as much as you'd like." Anna sat down at the table, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the fork. The pancakes were warm and fluffy, a far cry from the stale bread she had sometimes scavenged on the streets. The syrup glistened on the pancakes, and the taste was heavenly. For a moment, Anna forgot about everything: the streets, the fear, the scars. She was just a girl sitting at a table, eating a meal like any other child would. She took another bite, savoring the warmth and sweetness, but her thoughts couldn't help but drift back to the reality of her situation. This place, this kindness, it was all so new, so foreign to her. She had never been cared for like this, never known a home where someone made her food, where the walls weren't cold and threatening. And yet, a part of her was scared. What if this was just a fleeting moment? What if, in a few weeks, it would all disappear? But Mrs. Jenkins was still smiling at her, her eyes kind and understanding. "You don't have to worry about anything, Anna. You're here now. You're safe." Anna didn't know how to respond. She wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that this wasn't just some fleeting dream. But there was still a wall inside her, built from years of pain, abandonment, and survival. It would take time to let that wall down, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Later that day, Mrs. Jenkins took Anna to the park, just a short walk from the house. It wasn't the kind of park Anna had grown up near, no broken swings or littered paths. This park had well-maintained grass, blooming flowers, and a small playground. A few children were running around, laughing as they played, and Anna stood there for a moment, frozen. She watched them with wide eyes, a mixture of curiosity and fear. They were so free, so carefree. They didn't know what it was like to wonder where their next meal would come from, or if they would find a safe place to sleep at night. Anna envied them. For the first time, she realized how much she had missed the simple joys of childhood, feeling safe and cared for. Mrs. Jenkins noticed Anna's hesitation. "You don't have to play if you don't want to," she said softly, "but you're welcome to join them whenever you're ready." Anna nodded, still standing at the edge of the playground, unsure of how to enter this new world. But as she watched the children laugh, she felt a small tug in her chest. Maybe she could join them. Maybe she could learn to play again, like a child. After a while, one of the children, a girl about Anna's age, approached her. She had short brown hair and freckles, and her smile was bright and genuine. "Hi," the girl said, her voice sweet. "Do you want to play with us?" Anna hesitated. She wasn't sure if she knew how to play anymore. But the girl's smile was so inviting, so kind, that Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest. I think I'd like that," Anna said quietly. The girl grabbed her hand and led her toward the swings. Anna felt a flutter of nervousness, but as she sat on the swing and felt the cool breeze brush against her skin, she couldn't help but smile. It felt good, almost like a freedom she hadn't known was possible. As the day went on, Anna played with the other children, laughing and running alongside them. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't worried about where she would sleep that night, or if she would be safe. She was just a girl playing in a park, feeling the sun on her face and the joy of being alive. When the sun began to set and Mrs. Jenkins called her back to the house, Anna felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and she knew the road ahead would be difficult. But as she walked back to the house with Mrs. Jenkins, she felt a tiny spark inside her, a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to heal. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe that she could have a future. Anna woke up early the next morning, her mind racing as it always did when she opened her eyes. The days had passed in a blur of new experiences, new food, new faces, new routine. But with each passing day, the sense of peace that she had found in Mrs. Jenkins' home felt more like a dream, and the fear of it all slipping away loomed just around the corner. She had only been living with Mrs. Jenkins for a few days, but already it felt like everything was changing. She had taken the first steps toward healing, playing with the other children, enjoying the simple joys of childhood. But in the stillness of the morning, when the world was quiet and the shadows of the night still clung to the corners of the house, the past came rushing back. The memories of the streets, of the cold nights, and the harsh words were never far behind. And worse, there were the bruises and scars on her skin, the physical reminders of the life she had left behind. She still wore the red shirt every day, the fabric now softer than it had ever been, but it clung to her body in a way that reminded her of the fear she had lived with for so long. The shirt had been her shield, the only protection she had from the cruelty of the world. But now, she was safe. She was supposed to be free of that life, free of the pain. So why couldn't she let go? Anna lay in bed for a while, watching the light of the morning creep through the curtains. The quiet of the house was comforting, but also unsettling. It was a silence she had never known before, one that felt almost unnatural. The streets had always been loud, chaotic. The noise had been a constant presence in her life, even if it was a reminder of the danger around her. Here, in this peaceful home, the absence of noise made her feel like she was waiting for something, like something was missing. After a while, she slid out of bed and quietly made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Jenkins was already making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the room, and for a moment, Anna felt a sense of calm. This was real. She was safe. "Good morning, Anna," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice warm as always. "How did you sleep?" Anna shrugged, sitting down at the kitchen table. She didn't feel like talking much. She didn't know how to explain the turmoil inside her. There was a part of her that wanted to forget the past, to move forward and embrace the kindness that Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa had shown her. But there was another part of her one she couldn't ignore that still carried the weight of her past, still held onto the fear and hurt that had shaped her for so long. Not great, Anna admitted quietly. I keep thinking about the streets. Mrs. Jenkins paused, her face softening with understanding. It's normal to have those thoughts, she said gently. You've been through a lot, Anna. It's going to take time to heal, but I promise you, you don't have to face this alone. You're here now, and you're safe. It's okay to take things one step at a time. Anna nodded, but didn't speak. She didn't know if she believed her words. She wanted to, but the pain was still there, buried deep inside. The streets were never far from her. Thoughts, the people she had met, the ones who had hurt her, the ones who had ignored her, she could still see their faces, their eyes filled with indifference. She could still hear their cruel words. Are you sure about this? Anna asked suddenly, her voice shaking. Are you sure I can stay here? I don't want to be a burden. Mrs. Jenkins set down the pan and walked over to where Anna sat, kneeling beside her. Anna, you're not a burden, she said softly, placing a hand on Anna's shoulder. You are a child, and you deserve to be loved, to be cared for. I know it's hard to trust that, but it's the truth. You don't have to go back to the streets. Not ever again. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show how vulnerable she felt. She didn't want to break down, didn't want to admit how much pain she was still carrying. I want to believe you, Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. But sometimes it feels like it's all too good to be true, Mrs. Jenkins smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from Anna's face. I understand. It's going to take time, but every day we'll work through it together. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Anna felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. It was hard to imagine, hard to believe that someone truly cared for her, that this wasn't just a temporary place to stay until the next person forgot her. But Mrs. Jenkins' voice was steady, filled with the kind of warmth Anna had never known. It was real, and maybe, just maybe, Anna was starting to believe it. After breakfast, Mrs. Jenkins suggested they go for a walk around the neighborhood. Anna hesitated at first, still uncertain of how to navigate this new world, but something about the calm in Mrs. Jenkins' voice made her agree. They walked down the quiet street, the autumn air cool but refreshing. The neighborhood was peaceful, with small houses lined up neatly on either side. It was so different from the chaos of the streets Anna had known, the constant noise, the danger lurking around every corner. As they walked, Mrs. Jenkins spoke about the community, the people who lived there, and the small changes Anna could make to start feeling like she belonged. You're not just a visitor here, she said. You're part of this now too. And that's something worth holding on to. Anna glanced up at her, the faintest glimmer of something like hope flickering in her eyes. Do you think I can really fit in here? Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly, her eyes filled with reassurance. I know you can. You're already starting, Anna. One step at a time. As they continued walking, Anna felt the burden of her past, of the streets, starting to lighten just a little. She wasn't there yet. She wasn't healed, but she was moving forward, and that was enough for now. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe that maybe she was worthy of peace, of a future. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in this world. The days began to pass, with a strange sense of rhythm that Anna had never known before. The mornings were filled with the comfort of routine. Mrs. Jenkins' gentle voice greeting her, the smell of breakfast drifting through the house, and the simple comfort of knowing that she wasn't alone. Yet, despite the warmth and security that surrounded her, Anna's heart remained tangled in uncertainty. Every evening, after school, she would retreat to her room, sitting by the window and staring out at the quiet street. The sight of children playing, families walking hand in hand, was both comforting and painful. It reminded her of what she had missed. The laughter and joy she saw were things she had never been able to experience. She had never been allowed to feel safe, to feel like she could truly belong. That afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins sat down beside her, breaking the silence that had settled over Anna. How was school today, Anna? she asked gently, her voice full of concern. Are you making friends? Anna shrugged, her fingers tracing the edge of her red shirt. It's okay, she said quietly. There's a girl in my class, Lucy. She's nice. She talks to me sometimes. Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly. That's a good start. It's important to have someone to talk to. Anna nodded, but didn't say anything more. Talking had always been hard for her, especially with strangers. But Lucy had been different. She hadn't stared at Anna's clothes or the way she carried herself. She had simply said hello and invited Anna to sit with her. It had been the smallest act of kindness, but it had meant more to Anna than words could express. Despite Lucy's kindness, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. The other children in her class had lives that were so different from hers. They didn't know what it was like to survive on the streets, to face the danger of every alley, to be invisible to the world around them. It was hard to connect with them when her past felt so far removed from theirs. I don't know if I can do this, Anna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can be like them. Mrs. Jenkins' face softened, her eyes filled with understanding. Anna, she said softly, you don't need to be like anyone else. You're already exactly who you're meant to be. It's okay to be different, and it's okay to feel unsure. You're not expected to change everything overnight. What matters is that you're trying, and that's what counts. Anna looked up at Mrs. Jenkins, the weight of her words settling in. It was hard to imagine a life outside of survival, hard to let go of the constant vigilance, the worry that something could go wrong at any moment. But here, in this house, in this moment, she was allowed to feel something different. She was allowed to take her time. The next day, Anna made a decision, small but important. She would wear something different to school. For the first time since she had arrived at Mrs. Jenkins' house, she took off her red shirt. She still held onto it tightly, not ready to part with it completely, but she put on a clean, simple blouse and jeans instead. The red shirt was folded carefully at the bottom of her backpack. At school, Anna felt a mix of emotions. The unfamiliar fabric of the blouse felt strange against her skin. She missed the comfort of the red shirt, the shield it had provided, but she also felt a sense of relief. She had made a choice to move forward, to try something new. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. At recess, Lucy waved her over, and Anna hesitated before walking toward her. The other children were playing tag, their laughter filling the air. Anna felt out of place, but Lucy's smile, warm and welcoming, made her feel just a little less alone. Hi, Anna. Do you want to play with us? Lucy asked, her eyes bright with friendliness. Anna hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She didn't know how to play the way the other children did, but she wanted to try. She wanted to be part of something, too. Experience the world that had always been out of reach. As she joined the game, running and laughing with the other children, Anna felt something shift inside her. It wasn't perfect. She still had moments of doubt, moments when she felt like an outsider, but it was a beginning. She was starting to feel, even if just a little bit, like she could be part of something. She could be a child again. Later that evening, as Anna sat at the dinner table with Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa, she felt a quiet sense of peace settle in her chest. The fear, the anxiety, it was still there, lurking in the background, but it didn't have the same hold over her as it once did. She was learning to let go of the past, to embrace the new life that was slowly unfolding in front of her. That night, before bed, Mrs. Jenkins came to check on Anna, as she always. She stood in the doorway, her face filled with warmth and quiet affection. How was your day, Anna? She asked softly. Anna smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. It was good, I think. I think I'm starting to belong. Mrs. Jenkins' smile was gentle, proud. You've always belonged, Anna. You just needed to find your place. Anna nodded, feeling the truth of those words deep inside. It wasn't about being perfect, about fitting into a mold. It was about finding her own way, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, Anna allowed herself to believe that she could truly find peace, that she could build a future beyond the streets. It would take time, and there would be challenges along the way, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. Tomorrow, she would take another step forward. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Anna finally opened the drawer and took out the red shirt. It sat there, folded neatly at the bottom, surrounded by the new clothes Mrs. Jenkins had gently offered her over the last few weeks. None of the other shirts had memories sewn into their seams, but the red one, it held everything. She held it in her hands for a long time. The fabric was thinner now, almost see-through in places. A few small holes had formed near the seams. It still smelled faintly of the street, of smoke and rain and fear, and yet it also smelled of survival. It was the one thing she had never let go of, her only constant in a world that had spun too fast and too cruel. Anna sat on her bed, running her fingers over the worn cotton. Every thread seemed to hum with stories of nights, curled in alleyways, of hiding under bridges, of bruises hidden beneath its leaves. It had been her armor, her second skin, the shield that helped her vanish when the world turned violent. She had clung to it not because it was warm or beautiful, but because it reminded her she was still alive. But now, sitting in a room that belonged to her, in a house that felt like home, Anna realized something. She didn't need armor anymore. She didn't hear Mrs. Jenkins enter until the woman's voice gently broke the silence. "You thinking about something?" Anna looked up, startled, but not afraid. She gave a small smile and held up the shirt. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "It's part of me, but it's also everything I want to forget." Mrs. Jenkins crossed the room and sat beside her. "You don't have to forget," she said softly. "What you've been through with this shirt represents its part of your story. But that doesn't mean it has to control you." Anna stared at the red shirt again, her fingers tightening around the fabric. "It kept me safe," she whispered. "I didn't have anything else." "I know," Mrs. Jenkins said, "but now you do." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was warm this time, not empty. Then, with a slow breath, Anna stood up. She walked over to her closet and reached for a small box on the shelf, the one she kept for the things she wasn't ready to throw away, but couldn't carry anymore. Carefully, almost reverently, she folded the red shirt one last time and placed it inside, not buried, not forgotten, just resting. "I think I'm ready," she said. Mrs. Jenkins smiled, her eyes moist with quiet pride. "I know you are." That afternoon, Anna and Lisa went to the local library together. It was Lisa's idea. She said Anna might like the quiet, the books, the chance to explore without having to speak too much. Anna wasn't sure at first. She'd never been to a library. She didn't know how to use the system or where to find the stories that might speak to her. But when she stepped inside, she was struck by how calm everything was. The hush of turning pages, the rustle of coats, the way the light filtered in through the tall windows, it was like walking into a different kind of world. Lisa led her to the children's section, and they wandered between shelves for a while. Anna ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the raised letters under her fingertips. Then, one title caught her eye, "The Girl Who Found Her Way." She picked it up, unsure why, and opened it too. The first page. The story was about a girl who had lost her family, who lived in the shadows, who ran from everything because the world had taught her to. But she learned to trust again, little by little, and eventually she built a life she never thought possible. Anna read the first chapter right there on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, the book balanced on her lap. Something inside her cracked open, something deep and old and afraid, and warmth flooded in. She looked up at Lisa, who was reading quietly nearby. "I like this one," Anna said. Lisa smiled. "Then you should take it home." Home. Anna let the word sit in her chest, soft and new. It still felt strange, but less so every day. Later that evening, as she placed the book on her nightstand, Anna looked toward the box in her closet. The red shirt was still there, tucked away, not erased, not shamed, just part of her history. And now, she was ready to start writing the rest of her story. The following week brought something Anna hadn't expected: a call from Mrs. Silva. It was a warm Thursday afternoon when Mrs. Jenkins entered the living room holding the cordless phone. "Anna, someone wants to speak with you," she said, handing her the receiver with a knowing smile. Anna hesitated. Her fingers curled nervously around the phone. "Hello, Anna," came the familiar voice, warm and bright. "It's me, Mrs. Silva. I've missed you." Anna's heart fluttered. She hadn't realized how much she had missed hearing her teacher's voice. The woman who had first seen her, really seen her, under that red shirt. The one who had offered her more than just kindness, she had offered a way out. "I miss you too," Anna whispered. They talked for a while about school, about books, about the library trip. Mrs. Silva told her how proud she was and how everyone at school had noticed the change in Anna. "You smile more now," she said. "It's beautiful." Then, after a pause, Mrs. Silva asked, "Would it be all right if I came to visit you this weekend?" Anna looked at Mrs. Jenkins, who nodded with quiet encouragement. "Yes," Anna said, her voice soft but sure. "I'd like that." Saturday came quickly. Anna spent the morning pacing by the window, her heart thumping with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. She had grown since leaving the streets, not just in routine or comfort, but in who she was. She didn't want Mrs. Silva to see the girl she used to be. She wanted her to see who she was becoming. When the knock finally came, Anna opened the door herself. Mrs. Silva stood there with a warm smile and open arms, and Anna didn't hesitate. She ran into her embrace, burying her face in the woman's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of chalk and soft perfume. It felt like coming home again. "You look so strong," Mrs. Silva whispered. "I feel strong," Anna said. They sat in the backyard under the shade of the big jacaranda tree, where petals drifted down like confetti. Anna talked more than she thought she could about the library, her new room, the pancakes Mrs. Jenkins made every Sunday. She even talked about Lucy and how she was trying to make more friends. Mrs. Silva listened, her eyes shining. "You're growing into someone incredible, Anna." Anna looked down, fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. "I still get scared sometimes," she admitted. Like it might all go away, Mrs. Silva reached over and took her hand. "It's okay to be scared, but you're not living in fear anymore. You're building something new, and we're all still here, cheering you on." Anna smiled, the words sinking deep into her chest. It was true. She was building something new, not just with bricks and walls, but with trust, with friendships, with every choice she made to stay, to open up, to believe. As the sun dipped lower and the sky turned gold, Mrs. Silva stood to leave. Anna walked her to the door, holding on to the moment as tightly as she could. "You saved me," Anna said suddenly, before Mrs. Silva stepped off the porch. "No," Mrs. Silva replied, her voice soft and proud. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." As Anna closed the door behind her, she stood still for a moment, the warmth of the visit lingering in the air. She wasn't the girl in the red shirt anymore. She was Anna, a girl with dreams, with strength, and with people who loved her. And she was just getting started. Spring arrived gently, painting the neighborhood in soft greens and bursts of pink and yellow. The days stretched longer, and sunlight streamed through Anna's window in warm golden ribbons that wrapped around her like a hug. The air smelled different, now like flowers and fresh beginnings. Anna was changing, not just in the way she looked, though her face was fuller now, her eyes brighter, but in the way she carried herself. She walked with her shoulders a little straighter. She laughed more. She spoke up when she needed to. And perhaps most importantly, she had started to believe that she belonged. But with every step forward came new challenges. At school, Anna had started participating more. Her teachers noticed. She raised her hand in class, turned in her homework early, and asked questions when she didn't understand something. One afternoon, during a literature lesson, her teacher praised her for an essay she had written about resilience. "You wrote from a place of truth," he said. "And that's powerful." Anna had smiled shyly, unsure how to respond to praise. She still struggled with compliments, part of her always waiting for the other shoe to drop. But slowly, those moments of pride were outweighing the doubt. One day during lunch, Lucy and a few other classmates invited Anna to sit with them under the big tree at the edge of the schoolyard. It was a small gesture, but Anna felt her heart swell with gratitude. She didn't have to ask anymore. She didn't have to linger on the sidelines. They wanted her there. They talked about simple things, movies, music, silly rumors about the teachers, and Anna found herself laughing freely. For once, she wasn't the girl with the past. She was just a girl like them, and that meant everything. But one conversation later that week brought back a surge of emotions she hadn't expected. It was during an art project while Anna and Lucy were painting side by side. Lucy was chatting about a trip her family had planned for the summer. "You should come with us sometime," Lucy said. "Maybe not on the trip, but To hang out. My mom loves baking. You'd like her. Anna froze. Something about the word mom made her chest tighten. She tried to smile, but her hands started shaking. Hey, Lucy said, noticing the change. Are you okay? Anna nodded quickly, blinking back the sudden tears. Yeah, I don't have a mom. Not anymore. Lucy reached out, resting a gentle hand on Anna's arm. I didn't mean to make you sad. You didn't, Anna said. It's just, sometimes I forget. And then I remember, after school, Anna walked home slowly, her thoughts tangled. She hadn't cried in a long time. She hadn't let herself feel that kind of grief. But Lucy's kindness, her simple offer of friendship, had peeled back something deep. At home, Mrs. Jenkins noticed the sadness in her eyes right away. Rough day? She asked, setting down the dish towel. Anna nodded. Someone talked about their mom today. It caught me off guard. Mrs. Jenkins sat beside her on the couch. It's okay to miss her, she said, even if your memories are hazy. That kind of love, or the idea of it, doesn't go away. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up. Do you think I'll ever feel whole? Mrs. Jenkins didn't answer right away. She reached out and gently took Anna's hand. I think you already are, she said. Even with the pieces that hurt, you're whole because you're brave enough to feel all of it and still keep going. Anna rested her head on Mrs. Jenkins' shoulder. The warmth of the woman's presence, her calm voice, her steady hands, it was the kind of comfort Anna had never thought she'd find. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Healing wasn't about forgetting the pain. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about carrying it, learning from it, and using it to build something better. That night, before bed, Anna opened her journal, a gift from Lisa on her first week in the house, and wrote at the top of the page, I'm not who I used to be, and I'm not afraid of who I'm becoming. She paused, then added, I have a place in this world, and I'm going to protect it. As she closed the journal and turned off the light, Anna lay in bed with a quiet smile. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And for the first time in her life, she knew she was home. The next few months seemed to blur together in a whirlwind of new experiences. Anna was beginning to feel like part of the world around her, not just an observer, not just a survivor, but someone who belonged. The rhythm of life in Mrs. Jenkins' home had become second. Nature breakfasts together, evenings spent reading, and quiet Sunday afternoons baking with Lisa. It was the life she had only dared to dream of, a life that was now hers. But no journey is without its bumps. One afternoon, as Anna was walking home from school, a familiar face appeared in the distance, a face that made her freeze in place. It was one of the older boys she had encountered on the streets, the ones who had once taunted her, pushed her, hurt her. She recognized him immediately, though he didn't seem to notice her at first. Her heart raced in her chest as she stepped back, trying to retreat into the shadows of the alley. She could feel her pulse in her throat, the old fear creeping back. The street had always been unpredictable, and even though she was far from that life now, the memories were like scars under her skin. Just as she was about to turn and run, the boy noticed her. Anna, he called out, his voice gruff. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. What do you want? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The boy approached slowly, his face hard but unfamiliar, like someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes, but still held the bitterness of the streets. You don't recognize me, do you? He said, stopping a few feet away. I used to see you around. Back when you were out there. Anna's heart sank. He hadn't changed. He was still the same person who had been part of the world that had tried to break her. She clenched her fists, ready to bolt, but something inside her held her still. She wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't that scared, lonely child. I recognize you, Anna said, her voice stronger than she expected. But I'm not part of that world anymore, and you're not going to scare me. For a moment, the boy looked at her with something like surprise. Then his expression softened just slightly. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Anna. Just wanted to see how you were. People like us, we don't always make it out. But you, he paused, glancing at the ground. You made it. You're different now. Anna didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if his words were genuine or just a part of a life she no longer wanted to be a part of. But in that moment, she realized something. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had chosen something different. She had chosen to leave that life behind. "I'm not going back," Anna said firmly, meeting his eyes. "And you don't have to either." The boy seemed to hesitate for a second, then gave a quiet nod. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the street just as quickly as he had appeared. Anna stood there, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had faced him. She had faced the past. And she hadn't flinched. She smiled to herself, the weight of it all lifting just a little. She wasn't just surviving. She was living, and nothing, not even the ghosts of the streets, could take that away. Later that evening, Anna sat in her room, the events of the day still swirling in her mind. Mrs. Jenkins had noticed her distant look when she came downstairs for dinner. After they ate, she sat beside Anna and asked what was bothering her. "I ran into someone from the past today," Anna confessed quietly, looking down at her hand. "Someone who reminded me of everything I wanted to forget." Mrs. Jenkins didn't rush to speak. She simply sat with Anna, letting the silence settle between them. After a long pause, she said, "But you didn't forget, did you? You remembered, and you stood up for yourself. That's how we grow, Anna. We remember, but we choose how we move forward. And you chose strength," Anna nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. "I'm scared sometimes. Scared that if I look back, I'll go back." "You won't," Mrs. Jenkins said gently, wrapping her arm around Anna's shoulders. "Not unless you choose to. You've already taken the hardest steps, and you're not alone. You'll never have to face this alone again." Anna rested, her head against Mrs. Jenkins' shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of safety, of love surround her. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about choosing to live beyond it. It was about finding strength in the things that once tried to break her. She was learning slowly that she didn't need to be afraid of the past anymore. She could remember, yes, but she didn't have to let it define her. Tomorrow, she would keep moving forward, and that was enough. The months passed, each one a little brighter than the last. Anna found herself smiling more often, her laughter ringing out in the house and even in the halls at school. She was becoming someone who could see the world with hope, someone who was willing to fight for her place in it. Her relationship with Mrs. Jenkins deepened, and she began to see her not just as a guardian, but as a true mother figure. Mrs. Jenkins had been a constant, offering a love that Anna had never known could exist. Lisa had become more than just a friend. She was like a sister to Anna, someone who made her feel seen, heard, and valued. And school had become something Anna could look forward to. The walls of the classroom weren't intimidating anymore. The children who once seemed so different now felt like her peers, and she was just another student, learning and growing alongside them. But it wasn't just about academics anymore. It was about finding her voice, about realizing that her story mattered. One day, after school, Mrs. Jenkins sat Anna down at the kitchen table, a quiet intensity in her eyes. Anna noticed a thick envelope sitting in front of her, the words "adoption papers" written across the front in bold letters. Anna's breath caught in her throat, and she immediately felt her heart race. She had known this moment was coming, but it still felt like a dream. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Jenkins smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made Anna's heart swell. "This is your future, Anna," she said gently. "This is the paperwork to make you officially part of our family. No more temporary homes. No more wondering if you belong. You are home." Anna stared at the papers, her mind spinning. It wasn't just a formality. This was real. This was her chance to have a family, a future, a life that wasn't dictated by fear or abandonment. "Anna," Mrs. Jenkins said, leaning forward and placing her hands on the table, "you've come so far. And I know you still have moments of doubt. I can see it in your eyes. Sometimes that fear that maybe this isn't permanent. But I want you to know from the very bottom of my heart that you're home. You're part of this family, and I'm never letting you go." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to hold them back. She had spent so many years holding on to fear and doubt, afraid to trust anyone, afraid to believe in the possibility of love. But now she could let go. She could let herself be loved, truly loved. without fear of losing it. Anna started, but her voice cracked. She took a deep breath and tried again. I never thought this could happen. I didn't think I could have a family, a real family. But I do, don't I? Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her voice full of tenderness. Yes, Anna, you do, and I'm so proud of you. I've watched you grow into the amazing young woman you are, and I'm honored to be part of your life. In that moment, Anna felt something she had never felt before: peace. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She wasn't just trying to escape the pain of her past. She was finally living, and she was living with people who loved her, who had chosen her, and who would never abandon her. The rest of that evening was filled with quiet joy. Mrs. Jenkins made Anna's favorite meal, and Lisa joined them at the table, chatting and laughing like they always did. But tonight felt different. Tonight, it felt like they were marking the beginning of something new. Later, as Anna sat alone in her room, she picked up her journal, the one she had written in so many times. She flipped to a blank page and started to write. This is my story. The story of a girl who didn't give up. The story of a girl who found her way home. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm finally free. She closed the journal with a quiet sense of finality. The past would always be part of her. There would be scars. There would be memories. But they no longer defined her. What defined her now was the courage to keep going, the strength to love and be loved, and the realization that her future was still unfolding, full of endless possibilities. Anna put the journal down and walked over to the window, looking out at the stars. For the first time, the world felt big enough for her. The fear that had once dominated her life was gone, replaced by hope, by love, by a family that was now hers. And as the night stretched on, Anna closed her eyes and whispered to herself, I'm home. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The seasons continued to change, and with each passing day, Anna's world grew a little larger. She found herself walking with a new sense of purpose, her steps steady and sure. Every once in a while, when she caught her reflection in a shop window or looked at herself in the mirror, she was still amazed at how far she had come. The girl who had once been so small and invisible was beginning to stand tall, and the world around her didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. School had become a place where Anna not only learned but thrived. She excelled in her classes, always eager to ask questions, to challenge herself. Her teachers took notice of the change in her, and they began to praise her for her hard work and dedication. It felt good to be seen for who she was now: smart, driven, capable, not for her past or the pain that had once defined her. On weekends, Anna enjoyed spending time with Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa. They visited the local park, went to the movies, or just spent time together in the warmth of their home. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The love they shared made up for the years Anna had lost, and she cherished every moment of it. But as much as Anna had healed, there were still moments when the weight of her past pressed down on her. There were nights when she lay awake in bed, her mind wandering to the streets, to the people who had hurt her, to the uncertainty of her past life. The scars, both seen and unseen, had a way of resurfacing, reminding her of everything she had endured. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna found herself standing by the window, staring out at the sky. The orange and pink hues reflected the quiet peace she had come to know, but there was something tugging at her heart, a question she hadn't asked herself in a while. What about her real family? What about the parents she had lost so long ago? The memories of her mother were faint, like fragments of a forgotten dream. Her father, if he had ever been there, was little more than a shadow. And yet, there was a part of Anna that still wondered about them, still wondered about the love that might have been, if things had been different. Mrs. Jenkins appeared behind her, sensing the shift in the air. What's on your mind, Anna? She asked softly. Anna turned, her eyes filled with a quiet longing. I was thinking about my parents. I don't remember them much, but sometimes I wonder if they would have wanted me to end up like this. Mrs. Jenkins' heart ached for her, but she knew this moment would come. I don't know what your parents would have wanted, sweetie, but I do know that they would be proud of you. You've been through more than most people ever will, and you've come out stronger, and you've made your own way. I'm so proud of you. Anna nodded, though a quiet sadness lingered in her chest. She wasn't sure what she was, hoping for some kind of closure, some kind of connection to the parents she had lost. but she understood now that sometimes there are things we can never fully answer. Some questions are too deep, too painful, and the only thing left to do is move forward. Mrs. Jenkins wrapped her arms around Anna, pulling her close. You have a family now, Anna, a family that loves you, and you are enough, just as you are. You don't need to carry that weight alone anymore. Anna held on to Mrs. Jenkins, her shoulders shaking with emotion. She had never been able to fully let go of the past, but in this moment, she felt like she could. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it used to be. She didn't have to carry it on her own anymore. The following week, Anna received an invitation to speak at the school's annual Resilience Week. The theme of the event was about overcoming hardship and finding strength in adversity. The teachers had asked her to share her story about her journey from the streets to the safety of Mrs. Jenkins' home, about how she had rebuilt her life. At first, Anna wasn't sure she could do it. Standing in front of a crowd, sharing her deepest fears and vulnerabilities seemed impossible. But as she thought about it more, she realized that this was a chance and opportunity to show others that healing was possible, that strength could be found even in the darkest of places. On the day of the event, Anna stood in front of the packed auditorium, her heart racing. She could see her classmates in the audience, their faces expectant and kind. Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa were sitting together in the front row, their smiles reassuring. Anna cleared her throat and began. I'm Anna, she said, her voice steady but soft, and this is my story. I didn't have an easy life. I grew up on the streets. I didn't have a family. I didn't know where my next meal would come from or where I would sleep at night, but I never stopped hoping. Even when it felt like the world was against me, I kept going. As she spoke, Anna found that the words came easier than she had expected. She told them about the red shirt, about the people who had hurt her, about the moments of doubt and fear that had almost broken her. But she also spoke about the hope that had kept her going, the belief that there was something better waiting for her, even when it seemed impossible. I've learned that the past doesn't define you, she said, her voice gaining strength. Your past might be full of pain, but that doesn't mean it has to be your future. I'm not the girl I used to be, and I'm not afraid of who I'm becoming. I've learned that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to believe that love can heal. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then, slowly, applause began to fill the air. Anna stood there, her chest tight, her heart beating in her throat. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was pride. Pride in herself, pride in how far she had come. As she walked off the stage, Mrs. Jenkins was waiting for her with open arms. I knew you could do it, she whispered, holding Anna tight. I'm not done yet, Anna replied, smiling up at her. I'm just getting started. And for the first time, Anna truly believed that the future was hers to shape one step at a time. The end of the school year was approaching, and with it came a sense of finality, yet also a deep feeling of excitement for the future. Anna had never allowed herself to think too far ahead, never believed that tomorrow could be better than today. But now, with every passing day, she was beginning to understand that the future was something she could reach for, something she could build. Her life in Mrs. Jenkins' home was now more than just safety. It was a place of growth, of possibility, where dreams weren't just fleeting thoughts, but things that could be realized. Anna had become more than a survivor. She was a learner, a thinker, and a young woman discovering her potential in ways she never thought possible. Mrs. Jenkins had always been a guiding presence, but as Anna continued to grow, she began to see her as someone who trusted her to chart her own path. Lisa, too, had become an anchor in her life, someone who not only shared in the joys, but helped carry the weight of the harder days. As summer break neared, Anna started to feel the pressure of what came next. The school year had been challenging, but the real test was what lay beyond the gates. What would it mean to move forward without the structure of school, to face a world that was still foreign to her? There was so much still unknown. One evening, after dinner, Anna found herself sitting with Mrs. Jenkins on the back porch, looking out over the small garden that bloomed with bright flowers and creeping vines. The warm evening breeze rustled through the leaves, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. It was peaceful, a quiet kind of beauty. It felt right. What's on your mind, Anna? Mrs. Jenkins asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Anna hesitated. The words felt stuck in her throat, for a moment. I don't know what comes next, she said finally. School will be over soon, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what's out there. Mrs. Jenkins gave her a knowing look. It's okay to feel that way. You've been through so much. You're allowed to feel unsure. Anna's fingers nervously traced the rim of her glass. I just keep thinking, what if I mess it all up? What if I fail? What if I can't do it on my own? Mrs. Jenkins smiled gently, reaching out to take Anna's hand. I think you've been doing it on your own, Anna. You've made it this far, and I couldn't be prouder. The future may be uncertain, but you're stronger than you know. The important thing is that you're not doing this alone. You have people who love you, who believe in you. You'll figure it out. Anna looked down at their hands, the words settling into her heart. She had never realized how much she had been holding on to that fear of failure, that belief that she wasn't capable of creating the life she wanted. But maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. Maybe she was capable. She had already overcome so much. I want to make something of myself, Anna said, her voice quiet but firm. I want to go to college. I want to have a career, a future. I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live. Mrs. Jenkins squeezed her hand, her eyes shining with pride. I believe you can do anything you set your mind to, and whatever you choose, I'll be right here cheering you on. That night, as Anna lay in bed, she thought about all the possibilities. The fear was still there, hovering in the background, but it didn't feel as overwhelming as it once had. For the first time, she realized that the future wasn't a weight, it was an opportunity. It wasn't a destination to be feared, but a journey to be embraced. Summer passed quickly, and Anna dove into her plans with a focus and determination she had never known. She enrolled in a summer program at a local community college, one that would help her gain the skills she needed to prepare for her future. Mrs. Jenkins helped her fill out applications, and Lisa even helped her buy a few new clothes for the program, something Anna had never been able to afford before. When the first day of the program arrived, Anna stood at the door of the classroom, her heart racing with both excitement and nerves. She was no longer the shy, withdrawn girl she had once been. She was someone who had worked hard to get here, someone who had earned this moment. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was full of strangers, but Anna felt something different now. She didn't need to hide. She didn't need to pretend. She was here for a reason: to learn, to grow, to build the life she had always wanted. As she sat down and began to listen to the instructor, something shifted within her. For the first time in a long while, Anna felt at peace with the uncertainty of the future. She didn't have to know all the answers right away. What mattered was that she was taking the first step. The rest would follow. That evening, when Anna returned home, Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa were waiting for her in the kitchen, eager to hear how her first day went. I did it, Anna said, her voice full of pride. I really did it. Mrs. Jenkins pulled her into a tight hug. I knew you could. And in that moment, Anna realized that the journey wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about embracing the present, about stepping into the future with courage and hope. She wasn't just moving forward. She was becoming someone who could not only survive, but thrive. With each new day, Anna was building the future she had always dreamed of. And for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead was long, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her place in the world, and she was ready to make it her own. The months flew by, and with each new milestone, Anna felt herself stretching beyond the girl she once was. College applications, volunteer work, and the continued support of Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa all played a part in shaping the woman she was becoming. But despite the achievements and new experiences, there were still moments of quiet reflection, times when Anna would sit in the stillness and think about the journey that had brought her here. It was one of these quiet afternoons, after a long day of studying, that Anna found herself walking down the same familiar street she had once called home, the street where she had spent so many nights alone, unsure of where the next day would take her. Now, it was just another part of her past, a part that had shaped her, but didn't define her. Her steps were more confident now, her gaze more sure. She walked with purpose, the weight of her past a memory, not a burden. She didn't shy away from the street as she had once done. She no longer feared the familiar corners or the shadows of her former life. They no longer had power over her. Anna stopped in front of the old alley where she used to sleep. It was still there, though now it felt distant, almost unreal. The concrete walls seemed smaller, less intimidating. The sounds of the city, the honking horns, the shouting voices no longer filled her with dread. Instead, they seemed like background noise to a life she had long left behind. She smiled softly, her heart light. The girl who had once crouched in the corners of this alley, afraid and alone, was no longer the girl standing here. She had made it out. She had found her way. As Anna continued her walk, she passed by the small cafe that she had visited with Mrs. Jenkins when she first arrived in their home. The same comforting scent of coffee and baked goods wafted out, and for a moment, Anna felt a wave of gratitude. Every part of this city, from the harshest streets to the warmest corners, had helped shape her into the person she was now, and for that, she was thankful. Anna's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She pulled it out and smiled at the text from Lisa. "How's the studying going? I'm making your favorite for dinner tonight." Anna typed back quickly. "I'm almost done. Just taking a walk to clear my mind. Be home soon." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Anna turned the corner toward home, her pace quickening as she neared the familiar house that had become her sanctuary. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting in the kitchen, just as she always had, with dinner ready and a smile to greet her. The house was full of warmth and life, and it felt like the world was finally coming into focus. Anna had created something beautiful in her life, and it wasn't just the academic successes or the personal growth that filled her with pride. It was the love she had found, the love she had given herself, and the love she had received from those who truly saw her for who she was. When Anna stepped through the door, Lisa was at the counter, humming softly as she put the finishing touches on dinner. Mrs. Jenkins was sitting at the kitchen table, a welcoming smile on her face. Anna sat down, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day lift off her shoulders. "Today was good," she said, her voice steady. "It's been a long time since I walked through that part of the city, but it felt different this time." Lisa paused, looking at Anna curiously. "Different how?" "It didn't feel like home anymore," Anna said thoughtfully. "Not in the way it used to. The fear, the pain, it's not mine anymore. I've created something new. I'm finally free of it." Mrs. Jenkins reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Anna's. "You always had that strength inside you, Anna. You just had to find it." Anna smiled, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. She had found that strength through the love of her chosen family, through the support she had never thought she'd receive, through the courage to build a new life. And with each new step, she continued to grow, to become the person she had always dreamed of being. The dinner was simple but comforting, just like the life Anna had built for herself. As they sat around the table, talking and laughing, Anna felt a quiet peace settle in her chest. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, she didn't fear it. She was ready to face whatever came next. In that moment, Anna realized something important. The past was always going to be part of her, but it no longer had control over her. She was no longer defined by where she came from, but by who she had become. She was someone who had faced the darkest of times and had emerged stronger, someone who had learned to love herself, someone who had built a future. As the evening wore on, Anna looked around at the people she now called her family, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew now that she wasn't walking it alone, and that made all the difference. The road ahead was hers to travel, and she was ready to walk it with her head held high. And for the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe that the best was yet to come. Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.